The sky above the Arathas desert was a smear of ashen clouds, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from witnessing what was about to unfold. At the heart of this barren expanse stood the Golden Gate, an ancient relic from a time when gods and mortals walked the same paths. Untouched for millennia, its surface shimmered with intricate runes, telling stories of an age when light and darkness were in perfect balance. The gate was a link between realms, worlds long separated by divine decree. Now something disturbed its sanctity. It was not a physical touch but a presence, a weight that made the runes flicker unevenly. Hairline cracks, imperceptible to most, began to form along the golden edges, and the air around it shimmered as though the very fabric of existence was under strain. Solus, the guardian of light, was the first to feel the disturbance. In the celestial realm, where rivers of light flowed like eternal streams, he raised his gaze from meditation. A sharp pain pierced his essence, a warning etched into the very soul he was sworn to protect. The gate was weakening, and he knew why. Mortals. Their greed, wars, and unending hunger for power had fed the darkness, tipping the delicate balance. Solus stood, his radiant form casting long beams of light across the celestial expanse. A storm of energy coalesced around him, and he stepped through the veil between worlds. His descent to the mortal realm was marked by a surge of brilliance, scattering the shadows that clung to the gate. On the other side of the gate, Kael'thar, the Prince of the Abyss, had already arrived. His form was a writhing amalgamation of wings, horns, and tendrils of shadow, flames licking at his heels as he pressed one clawed hand against the gate. The golden surface sparked and groaned under his touch, the runes dimming as darkness seeped into their light. Kael'thar's fiery eyes burned with both malice and triumph. For the first time in an age, he could feel the gate yielding. The mortal realm had been his ally, though unwittingly. Their wars, their hatred, and their insatiable thirst for forbidden power had fed the abyss. Among them, a sorcerer named Alaric had proved particularly useful. It was Alaric's forbidden rituals and sacrificial rites that had created a rift, allowing Kael'thar to reach the gate. The sorcerer had paid the price, consumed by his own ambition, his soul now a flickering ember in the abyss. Kael'thar laughed, a sound that made the ground tremble. After millennia, the gate bends to my will. Your precious harmony falters, Solus. As Solus arrived, his feet touched the barren ground, and the light from his presence pushed back the encroaching darkness. His calm demeanor masked the tension within. He extended a hand, his palm glowing with the warmth of 1,000 suns, and pressed it firmly against the gate, directly opposing Kael'thar's touch. You will not pass, Solus declared, his voice steady and resolute. The worlds are not yours to claim. Kael'thar's grin widened, his fanged maw illuminated by the smoldering heat of his breath. And yet they crumble without me. Why protect a realm that devours itself? Because even in their darkest hour, they carry a spark of light, Solus countered. A spark that you fear. Kael'thar snarled, pressing harder against the gate. The runes wreathed as if alive, their golden glow flickering under the strain. Fear? I am the void, the end. It is you who fears me, Guardian. The clash between their opposing powers sent ripples of energy across the plane. Light and shadow twisted and clashed, neither able to overpower the other. Yet both beings knew the gate was failing. Solus felt his strength waning as Kael'thar's corruption seeped deeper into its golden surface. Unbeknownst to them, a third presence was drawn to the gate. Lyra, a young woman from a nearby village, had been haunted by vivid dreams of the gate, visions that whispered of a choice only she could make. Clutching an ancient amulet passed down through her family, she ventured into the desolate plain, the weight of the unknown pressing on her chest. As she stepped closer, Kael'thar's fiery eyes narrowed. Immortal, he hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. What foolishness brings you here? Solus turned, his radiant gaze softening as it fell upon her. Child, you do not belong here. This is a battle beyond your understanding. But Lyra stood firm, her trembling hands gripping the amulet. Then why do I see this place in my dreams? Why do I feel that I've been called? Her words silenced the two titans, their eternal conflict momentarily eclipsed by her presence. The amulet around her neck began to glow, resonating with the gate's energy. Its light mirrored the runes on the golden surface, and the air grew still. Kael'thar chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. Do you see, Solus? Your precious mortals meddle with forces they cannot comprehend. She will tip the scales, one way or another. Solus's expression darkened. The gate responds to her. She may be the key to restoring balance. Or to shattering it, Calthar retorted. Lyra's pulse quickened as both beings turned their full attention to her. The weight of their expectations and the fate of worlds bore down on her shoulders. She had only just arrived, and already she could feel the impossible choice looming. The air around the Golden Gate grew impossibly still, as if the world itself paused to observe the moment. Lyra could feel their gazes, one filled with radiant warmth, the other searing with fiery contempt, fixed upon her. She clutched the amulet tighter, its glow intensifying with each step she took toward the gate. Caltar's booming voice broke the silence, echoing with disdain. Little mortal, you do not grasp the gravity of where you stand. Turn back before you are consumed by forces far beyond your understanding. Lyra hesitated but held her ground. If I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling but firm, then why have I been called here? Why do I see this gate in my dreams? The amulet flared as she spoke, sending ripples of energy through the air. Solus, his hand still pressed firmly against the gate, studied her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Because the gate chooses, Solus said, his voice softer now, like the first light of dawn, and it has chosen you as its arbiter. Your presence here means you carry the power to tip the balance. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. I didn't ask for this. I'm just a girl from a village. How could I possibly decide something so monumental? Calthar chuckled darkly. How indeed? This is the folly of your kind, Solus. You place the fate of realms in the hands of the weak and unworthy. And yet, Solus countered, his voice gaining strength, it is their weakness, their imperfection, that gives them the capacity to choose. It is a power neither you nor I can fully comprehend. Calthar sneered but said nothing, his burning gaze never leaving Lyra. The tension thickened as the gate began to pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Each beat sent waves of energy through the desolate plain, causing the ground to tremble. Lyra's mind raced. Visions flooded her thoughts. Images of a world consumed by shadow, of cities drowning in fire, and of desolation spreading like a plague. Then, in stark contrast, came visions of a blinding, unrelenting light, erasing everything in its path. Both futures felt suffocating, unbearable. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "If I seal the gate, what happens?" Solus's face grew somber. The light and shadow will remain separated, but at a cost. The mortals who lose their way may never find redemption, and the light that seeks to guide them will be forever cut off. Yet, it would mean safety, an end to this threat. "And if I open it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Calthar leaned closer, his voice a seductive whisper that carried the promise of forbidden power. "If you open it, you grant freedom, to light, to shadow, and to yourself. The worlds will no longer be bound by balance. You could reshape them as you see fit, little one." Solus interjected, his tone heavy with warning. Opening it would mean chaos. Darkness would surge into the mortal realm, and the light would struggle to contain it. You risk everything. Lyra felt trapped, the weight of their words pressing down on her. "And what if I choose wrong?" Solus stepped forward, his presence a reassuring warmth. "There is no certainty, Lyra, only the choice you believe to be just." Calthar's grin widened. "Or you could join me. Together, we would obliterate this false notion of balance and rebuild the realms in our image." Lyra took a shaky step back, clutching the amulet as if it were her only anchor. "I don't want to rebuild anything. I just want to protect the people I care about." The ground beneath her cracked, and the air shimmered as the gate began to hum with a deeper, more insistent rhythm. Lyra could feel its pull, as though it was alive and reaching out to her. In her village, Lyra had always been the quiet one, the listener, the girl who blended into the background. But now, standing between Solus and Calthar, she felt the eyes of the cosmos upon her. Memories of her family and the people she loved flashed in her mind, their laughter, their struggles, their resilience. She thought of how their lives, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, still carried meaning. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to the gate. "I won't choose destruction, and I won't choose isolation. There has to be another way." Calthar laughed, a sound that made the air itself seem to shudder. "Another way?" Balance is an illusion, little mortal. There is only the strong and the weak. Choose wisely or you'll find yourself devoured. Solus said nothing, but the faintest flicker of a smile crossed his lips. He extended his hand toward Lyra. The amulet you carry is the key. Its power comes from the guardians who forged the gate. Trust it, and trust yourself. Lyra's heart pounded as she raised the amulet, its glow growing brighter and brighter until it illuminated the entire plain. The gate's runes responded, their golden light intertwining with the shadows that Kelthar exuded. The balance shifted precariously, as if waiting for her final decision. "I won't let light or darkness take everything," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I choose balance." With trembling hands, she placed the amulet against the gate. The moment it touched the surface, a shockwave of energy erupted, knocking Solus and Kelthar back. Lyra screamed as the power surged through her, her mind overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the forces she had unleashed. The gate began to change. Its golden surface morphed, the runes twisting and reforming as light and shadow danced together. The pulsing rhythm grew steady, and for a fleeting moment, the plain was utterly silent. When Lyra opened her eyes, she was no longer standing in the barren plain. The land had transformed. Flowers of light and shadow bloomed side by side, and the sky above was a tapestry of dawn and dusk. She felt an aching heaviness in her chest and looked down to see the amulet fused into her skin, its faint glow a constant reminder of her choice. Solus and Kelthar were gone. Or rather, their forms had dissolved, their essence now woven into the fabric of the gate. Lyra could still hear their voices, one a gentle encouragement, the other a dark, mocking whisper. She was no longer a mere mortal. She had become the guardian of balance, a role she hadn't asked for but could not refuse. Lyra stood in the center of the transformed plain, her knees trembling as she surveyed the landscape around her. The desolation was gone, replaced by an eerie yet beautiful harmony. Flowers of shadow black and radiant gold swayed together in a silent rhythm. The sky above reflected her choice, neither fully light nor dark, but a perpetual twilight where dawn and dusk coexisted. Her hand instinctively moved to her chest, where the amulet's faint glow pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. It was no longer an artifact she carried. It had become a part of her, a mark of her role as the guardian of balance. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but there was no time to reflect. She felt a subtle pull, a connection to the gate and the world it now bridged. "I need to return," she murmured to herself, her voice trembling. Taking a hesitant step forward, she realized the landscape responded to her presence. The flowers turned toward her, like sentinels acknowledging their guardian. The ground beneath her feet grew firm as she walked, a clear path forming toward her village. As Lyra approached the outskirts of her home, a strange silence greeted her. The fields, once bustling with farmers, were eerily empty. She passed cottages with windows tightly shuttered, their chimneys void of smoke. Her heart sank. Something was wrong. When she reached the village square, the tension became palpable. A group of villagers had gathered, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. They whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on her. "She's back," someone murmured. "But look at her. She's different," said another, pointing at the faint glow emanating from Lyra's chest. "Is it her fault? The sky hasn't been the same since she disappeared." Lyra hesitated. She wanted to explain, to reassure them, but the words caught in her throat. How could she tell them what had happened? That their world had been on the brink of destruction, and she had made a choice no mortal should ever have to make. From the crowd, a familiar face emerged, Rhea, the village healer and Lyra's closest confidant. Her lined face softened as she approached, concern etched into every wrinkle. "Lyra," Rhea said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What happened to you? The night you disappeared, the ground shook and the sky changed. People are scared." Lyra glanced around, seeing the fear mirrored in every gaze. "I don't know how to explain it, Rhea," she began, her voice faltering. "There's a gate, a connection between worlds. I had to make a choice, to keep the balance. And now," she touched her chest, the faint light pulsing beneath her fingers. "I'm not the same. The gate marked me." Rhea's brow furrowed, but her hand remained steady on Lyra's shoulder. "Marked or not, you're still Lyra. But this balance you speak of, it's not just the sky that's changed. Strange things have been happening." "Strange?" Lyra asked, her voice laced with unease. Rhea nodded gravely. The forest to the east? It's not right. The trees have twisted, and shadows move as if alive. Travelers speak of creatures lurking at the edge of the woods, things that shouldn't exist. Lyra's pulse quickened. The gate's influence was seeping into the mortal realm. She had expected harmony, but the balance she fought to preserve was far more fragile than she realized. Later that evening, Lyra stood at the edge of the village, staring toward the dark silhouette of the eastern forest. She clutched the amulet fused to her chest, willing it to guide her. Balance is a struggle, Solas's voice whispered in her mind, a gentle reminder. But the abyss never rests, came Kael'thar's dark, mocking tone. She shivered, caught between their echoes. Her choice had saved the realms from annihilation, but it had also made her a fulcrum. Every shift in light or shadow would ripple through her, demanding her intervention. I can't leave it unchecked, she said to herself, determination hardening her resolve. The next morning, Lyra prepared to venture into the forest. She armed herself with a simple blade, an heirloom of her family, and packed what provisions she could carry. The villagers watched silently as she left, their uncertainty palpable. Rhea caught up to her just as she reached the outskirts. You don't have to do this alone, the healer said. Lyra shook her head. I do. This isn't something you can fight with herbs or prayers. Whatever's happening out there, it's because of me. I have to set it right. Rhea hesitated, then handed Lyra a small vial of clear liquid. For courage, she said with a faint smile, and for healing, if you need it. Lyra took the vial gratefully and pressed onward. The forest felt alive in a way that unsettled her. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches reaching like grasping hands. Shadows moved without a source, and the air was thick with an oppressive stillness. As she ventured deeper, she heard whispers, not voices, but faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She gripped her blade tightly, her eyes darting at every flicker of movement. The first creature appeared without warning. It stepped from the shadows, its form a grotesque amalgamation of sinew and darkness. Its glowing red eyes locked onto her, and a guttural growl rumbled from its throat. Lyra's instincts took over. She raised her blade as the creature lunged. Their clash was chaotic, the beast's strength far surpassing her expectations. She managed to slash its side, a burst of shadowy mist erupting from the wound, but it retaliated with a swipe of its claw, knocking her to the ground. Gasping for breath, she reached for the amulet. Its warmth spread through her fingers, and a burst of light erupted from her chest, sending the creature reeling. It dissolved into a swirling mass of darkness before vanishing entirely. Lyra sat up, her heart pounding. The balance, even here, it's unstable. She pushed herself to her feet, her resolve steeling. This was only the beginning. The oppressive atmosphere of the forest grew heavier as Lyra ventured deeper. Each step felt like wading through an invisible tide, the shadows pulling at her resolve. The whispers around her grew louder, still unintelligible but laced with a malevolent intent. She tightened her grip on the blade, the faint glow of the amulet at her chest, her only comfort in the suffocating darkness. Ahead, the trees began to thin, revealing a clearing bathed in an eerie half-light. At its center stood a crumbling stone altar, vines crawling over its surface like veins. The air here was colder, and Lyra's breath fogged in front of her. Something about the altar felt familiar, as though it were tied to the visions that had haunted her dreams. As she approached, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and resonant, echoing in her mind. Lyra, guardian. She froze, her pulse quickening. Who's there? She demanded, her voice wavering but firm. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was human in shape but wreathed in darkness, its features indistinct. Its eyes glowed faintly, a haunting mix of crimson and gold. I am the Echo, it said, its voice reverberating with ancient power, a fragment of what was and what will be. Lyra instinctively raised her blade, her other hand clutching the amulet. What do you want? The Echo tilted its head, its presence neither hostile nor welcoming. I do not seek. I exist. The balance you have wrought has awakened me, as it has awakened others. But the scales are not yet steady, Guardian. Your journey has only begun. Lyra took a cautious step closer. Then tell me how to fix this. The gate, the creatures, it's all wrong. The balance is slipping. The Echo's voice softened, almost mournful. Balance is not a state. but a cycle. Creation and destruction, light and shadow, each must rise and fall, yet neither can triumph. You have preserved the cycle, but in doing so, you have disrupted its flow. Mortals like you cling to absolutes. Your choice to preserve balance was but the first of many. The words struck Lyra like a blow. I didn't choose this. I only wanted to protect my home, my family. And now you carry the burden of their safety, the echo replied. The forest has become a manifestation of imbalance, a wound in the fabric of the world. You must mend it, but beware. Not all wounds heal cleanly. Before Lyra could respond, the figure dissipated, fading into the shadows. In its place, the altar began to glow faintly, revealing an inscription in runes similar to those on the gate. She approached cautiously, tracing the symbols with her fingers. The runes pulsed in response to her touch, and the amulet's glow intensified. The words whispered into her mind, "When the light falters and the shadow grows, seek the guardian's flame to illuminate the path unseen." Lyra frowned, the cryptic message gnawing at her thoughts. The guardian's flame? What does that mean? The whispering forest gave no answer. Gathering her courage, she stepped away from the altar and pressed onward. The deeper Lyra ventured, the more the forest seemed to resist her. The twisted trees formed walls of gnarled branches, and the ground grew uneven, forcing her to tread carefully. Strange creatures skittered in the periphery, their forms barely discernible. Her every step felt watched, scrutinized. Her journey was interrupted by a distant scream, a raw, guttural sound that froze her in place. It was unmistakably human. Lyra hesitated only a moment before running toward the source, her blade ready. She burst into another clearing and stopped short. A man in tattered clothing was cornered against a tree by one of the shadow creatures. It was larger than the one she had encountered earlier, its form shifting unnaturally as it closed in on its prey. "Get back!" Lyra shouted, charging forward. The creature turned its attention to her, letting out a distorted screech. It lunged, but Lyra was ready. She dodged its swipe and slashed her blade across its flank. The creature recoiled, but this time it didn't retreat. Instead, it twisted around her, its movements unnervingly fluid. Lyra struck again, her blade glowing faintly as it connected. The creature howled, its form destabilizing into a mass of writhing darkness before dissipating into the ground. The man slumped against the tree, his breathing ragged. Lyra rushed to his side. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, though his face was pale with terror. "No, thanks to you. What was that thing?" Lyra hesitated. "Something that shouldn't exist." "What are you doing out here?" "I could ask you the same," he retorted, though his voice was tinged with gratitude. "The name's Gareth. I was a merchant. My caravan was ambushed by these things. I ran, but the others..." His voice broke. Lyra placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry. I don't think those creatures are random. They're tied to what's happening with the balance." Gareth frowned. "Balance? What are you talking about?" "It's complicated," Lyra said. She looked around, her instincts screaming that the forest wasn't safe. "We need to get out of here." As they moved together, Gareth's presence was a strange comfort. Though he knew little of what Lyra was facing, his occasional quips and pragmatic outlook grounded her. She realized how much she missed human companionship, how isolating her role as guardian had already become. But her reprieve was short-lived. They hadn't gone far when the forest seemed to shift. The path they had taken disappeared, replaced by dense, unyielding thickets. Did we get turned around?" Gareth asked, panic creeping into his voice. "No," Lyra said grimly. "It's the forest. It's alive." The ground trembled beneath them, and from the shadows emerged 3 more creatures, their forms larger and more defined than before. Each glowed with an unnatural energy, their movements synchronized. Gareth backed away, his face pale. "We can't fight those." Lyra tightened her grip on her blade, the amulet flaring with light. "We don't have a choice." The creatures closed in, their glowing eyes fixed on Lyra and Gareth. Their forms were more distinct now, as if feeding off the imbalance in the forest. Tendrils of shadow writhed like living chains, and their guttural growls filled the air with dread. Gareth stumbled back, gripping a broken branch as if it could offer any protection. "Stay behind me," Lyra shouted, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The amulet on her chest pulsed brighter, resonating with the looming danger. She raised her blade as the first creature lunged, its claws raking through the air. Lyra sidestepped, driving her blade into its side. A burst of shadow erupted from the wound, but the creature didn't fall. Instead, it twisted unnaturally and lunged again. The second creature joined the fray, its massive frame barreling toward her. Lyra barely had time to block, the impact throwing her back against a tree. Her breath came in gasps as she struggled to stand, her vision blurring from the force of the blow. Lyra. Gareth's panicked voice cut through the chaos. She turned to see him cornered by the third creature, its tendrils coiling around him. With a surge of desperation, Lyra gripped the amulet. Its light exploded outward, searing the creatures. They recoiled, their forms flickering, as if struggling to maintain their shape. Lyra took the chance to strike. She drove her blade into the nearest creature, and this time, the light from the amulet coursed through the weapon. The shadow beast let out a piercing screech before dissolving into ash. The other two hesitated, their movements faltering. Lyra stepped forward, her blade glowing brighter now, the amulet feeding its power. She slashed through the tendrils binding Gareth, then turned to face the remaining creatures. "This ends now," she growled. The forest itself seemed to respond to her resolve. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with energy. The remaining creatures lunged simultaneously, but Lyra moved with newfound precision. Each strike of her blade was swift and true, empowered by the light within her. The shadows screamed and dissolved into the earth, leaving only silence in their wake. Gareth slumped to the ground, clutching his side. "Remind me to never doubt you again," he muttered, his voice trembling. Lyra offered him a hand, her breathing heavy. "We're not done yet." The forest groaned as if alive, the twisted trees parting to reveal a faint glow in the distance. Lyra felt the pull again, the same energy that had guided her to the altar. She turned to Gareth. "Stay here. I have to see what's ahead." "Alone? Are you serious?" Gareth protested, struggling to stand. "You barely survived that." "This isn't your fight," she said softly. "You've already risked enough." Gareth hesitated but nodded. "Just come back in one piece, okay?" Lyra gave him a faint smile before turning toward the glow. The path ahead was lined with gnarled trees, their twisted branches forming an archway. As she stepped through, the oppressive darkness began to lift, replaced by a warmth that seeped into her very soul. At the heart of the clearing stood an ancient brazier, its flames a radiant gold and deep black intertwined. The Guardian's flame. Lyra approached cautiously, the amulet pulsing in harmony with the flickering light. She could feel its power, raw, untamed, and deeply connected to the balance she had sworn to protect. The voice of the echo returned, softer this time. "You have found the flame, Guardian, but its power is not freely given." Lyra tightened her grip on the amulet. "What must I do?" "Prove your resolve," the echo replied. "Step into the flame, let it judge your heart, only then can you restore the balance." Fear gripped her. The flame's light was beautiful but unyielding, promising no mercy for those who faltered. She thought of her village, the corrupted forest, and Gareth waiting behind. She thought of the gate and the choice she had already made. Balance was never easy, but it was worth fighting for. Taking a deep breath, Lyra stepped into the flame. Pain surged through her body, and for a moment she thought she would be consumed. Memories flooded her mind, her childhood, the struggles of her village, the horrors of the creatures she had faced. The voices of Solus and Calthar echoed in her mind, their eternal conflict testing her resolve. But then she felt something else. Warmth. Not of destruction, but of renewal. The flame didn't burn her. It cleansed her. The light and shadow within her intertwined, balancing each other as the amulet's glow intensified. When the light faded, Lyra stood unscathed. The flame in the brazier had changed, now burning steady and pure. She felt its power coursing through her, a strength that was neither wholly light nor dark, but something entirely her own. As she returned to Gareth, the forest began to transform. The twisted trees straightened, their branches reaching skyward. Flowers of light and shadow bloomed once more, and the oppressive whispers fell silent. Gareth stared at her, wide-eyed. "You did it. The forest, it's changing." Lyra nodded, though her expression remained somber. "The balance here is restored, but it's fragile. There will be more challenges." "What now?" Gareth asked, his voice laced with awe. Lyra looked toward the horizon, where the faint shimmer of the gate was just visible. I keep moving. The gate's influence is spreading. There are others like this forest, wounded, teetering on the edge. I have to heal them. Gareth hesitated before stepping closer. Then I'm coming with you. I owe you my life, and it sounds like you'll need someone to watch your back. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. If you're sure, it won't be easy. Easy stopped being an option when I met you, he replied, grinning faintly. Together they left the forest behind, the Guardian's flame burning within Lyra as a beacon of hope. Her journey was far from over, but she had taken the first step toward preserving the balance.